Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to go over my review of NXT. I'm going to kind of change it up a little bit today, man. Looking back on the show last night, I kind of wanted to do things a little bit different, kind of just talk to you guys, give you my takes on the show, how I felt about the show, and the improvements and some more improvements that they might need going forward. So let's just start with the show, man. Obviously, it was a big night for NXT. It was their debut episode last night on their new home, the CW Network. It was a big deal. It was a big deal for WWE. It was a big deal for NXT, and just a big deal for the entire company. With that being said, in the beginning of the night, you had Shawn Michaels come out with Triple H. Mainly Shawn Michaels. He was presenting new NXT championships. The championships look great. The championships, it's a lot different than what the NXT 2.0 championships look like. And that was a big improvement. Obviously, going to a new network and stuff like that, a new home, obviously they needed to change things up. And what better way to do that than bring in new title belts? And, the look of the belts look great. The other thing that I noticed about NXT that was, I guess, a good thing and a bad thing was that there really wasn't much change as far as the logo was concerned. Obviously, it still remains NXT. But they went from the NXT 2.0 look to, or the black and gold, if you will, to what it is now, which is pretty much black and silver. So there really wasn't a whole lot of change there. They have a new intro video for NXT with new music to that intro, which actually the intro was fire, bro. I thought the intro was great. But all in all, the show last night, besides some of the matches they had lined up, they had Julia versus Roxanne Perez, which I thought, and I will admit, I thought that CM Punk was going to be the special guest referee for that match. But instead, he was a special guest referee for the main event between Ethan Page and Trick Williams. But I think beginning off the night, they had Julia and Roxanne Perez. It was a solid match, man. It wasn't a bad match. I think Roxanne Perez, a lot of people were trying to figure out what Perez was going to do because when Perez came into the company, obviously she was a babyface and now she's a heel. And she's doing a fantastic job. She's still young in the game and very young in NXT, so she still has a lot of time to develop and to build her craft and what she's done in professional wrestling. So, sky's the limit for Roxanne Perez. The biggest takeaway I'll say from that matchup was Julia. I've seen a couple highlights and some matches from when she was in Stardom. And Julia, when she was a free agent, she was a high-profile target for free agency for whether it was AEW or WWE. And rightfully so. She's a great talent, and she's a great addition to any roster, whether it's WWE, TNA, AEW, and the list goes on. But with that being said, do I think they kind of pushed her into this match way too quickly? Yeah. I think Julia needed a couple more matches on her card for NXT before she challenged Roxanne Perez for the women's NXT championship. But that being said, was it a bad performance by Julia? No, I just think she needed more time to develop, get used to the NXT system, have some more wins over, underneath her belt, and then finally challenge Roxanne Perez. But Perez was successful in a title defense, and then after that, she was, it wasn't an approach, more or less. It was more or less a return of Cora Jade, which, had mixed reactions from what I've seen. Cora Jade was out for a while, I think, due to injury. And she finally returned, and looks like she has her sights set on Roxanne Perez. With that being said, though, with the women from NXT, the roster is stacked, man. The NXT women's roster is very, very good. There was also a vignette that was played last night, a video package played last night of another superstar coming in for the women on NXT, and it's going to be a great addition as well to the NXT women's roster. But moving on from that, we also had, I think the biggest match of the night was Zachary Wentz versus Wes Lee. Obviously, there's a little hostility there because obviously they were a part of the Rascals at one point. And obviously, it was a great match. It was probably the best match of the night. I would say better than Trick Williams and Ethan Page, to be honest with you. It was a great match. Wes Lee was able to get the victory in that matchup, but there was a lot of crazy spots in that match between Wentz and Lee. And Lee became victorious in that matchup. But that was, to me, the match of the night and probably one of the highlights of NXT last night. The other thing I want to talk about, too, obviously, is Ethan Page and Trick Williams for the NXT World Championship. It was a solid matchup with Trick Williams becoming victorious and becoming the new NXT World Champion. Obviously, CM Punk being there was a big deal. The show was live from Chicago. It's Punk's hometown, so it was a big deal for CM Punk as well. But, looking at the negative outlook of it, to be honest with you, man, there really wasn't a whole lot of change compared to what I've seen beforehand to what I've seen now. And credit, it's their first episode on the CW network, and I get that. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, give it time, let it develop. I'm not going to sit here and say, I'm not going to be one of those podcasters that are going to sit here and say that NXT is awful. I'm not going to sit here and say that. Obviously, I told you guys before, man, when it pertains to NXT, we were spoiled as fans with the NXT Black and Gold brand. I mean, we will never get anything like that again. And to be honest with you, what the NXT Black and Gold brand presented to us as fans, I mean, you're talking, so many, at the time, so many independent talents that not a lot of the fans knew about. It was more or less hearsay of who this person is or who that person is. And when Triple H took over NXT and brought these talents in to NXT, man, those takeovers were absolutely incredible. With the commentary from Mauro Ranallo, it was just great, and like I said, as fans, we were spoiled, man. Really, I wish we can go back to what it once was for NXT, but I don't think that's ever going to happen again, and I don't think the format of what NXT is now, we're never going to see that again. Did the Motor City Machine Guns show up last night? No, they did not. Are they coming to NXT? Yes. It's only a matter of when at this point, which, again, will be a great addition to the NXT roster. But for me as a fan, man, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to do a little bit, things differently than I usually do with these reviews and just talk to you guys about it, man. For me as a fan, it's hard to watch NXT, to be honest with you. And I think NXT last night was kind of underwhelming from what I was expecting. And I had very high expectations for last night's show, their debut episode on the CW network, NXT's new home from here on out, or at least for the foreseeable future. I had very high expectations. Were those expectations met for me personally? No, they were not. I'm not going to sit here and say that it was, hard to watch and to get through. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But was it my cup of tea? No, it was not. Obviously, I know what NXT is trying to do. NXT has a working relationship, a very strong working relationship for what it seems, with TNA Impact. You saw that match with Roxanne Perez versus Jordan Grace. It was a great matchup. You've seen, the likes of Joe Hendry come over to NXT, and he's a big deal, obviously, in TNA and just the wrestling world in total. And having him a part of NXT has been great as well. So obviously that working relationship there between TNA and NXT has really panned out for both companies. Was I also expecting some NXT talent a part of this show? Yeah, I was. I was very surprised that we didn't see anybody from NXT a part of this show in some kind of capacity, whether it was an interference or, a vignette or something like that. Yeah, I was very surprised that we didn't see anything from TNA, even though I know it's NXT and I know it was their debut episode, so obviously they wanted to make it all about NXT. And like I said earlier, man, Shawn did a great job with presenting new belts. There was a new, intro to NXT. Obviously the colors have changed for NXT as far as what the logo was. Now it's black and silver, I believe. So there really wasn't a whole lot of change there, to be honest with you. But for me as a fan, it's just not my cup of tea, man. I think NXT, and maybe it's something that I'm still holding on to what it once was with the black and gold brand and the takeovers. And maybe that's on me, and I'll admit that to y'all. But it's not the same feeling, man. I wasn't, again, I had a lot of high expectations for this show, and those expectations weren't met. I'm not sitting here saying that we need something like AEW when they put on these banger matches 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying good storylines and the build and, excitement. I mean, Shawn Michaels was saying that there are going to be some big, big surprises for the debut episode of the CW network for NXT, and I didn't really see those big surprises, to be honest with you. It's just not the same brand, man. It's really not, and it's nothing taken away from the talent that's currently on NXT. I think Trick Williams is going to be a main eventer here relatively soon on the main roster. In time. I think Trick Williams is great. The theme song is definitely catchy. And the theme song is great. Big fan of the theme song. But at the same time, too, if you look at before Trick Williams beat Ethan Page, man, and I mean this with the utmost respect to Ethan Page, his career in AEW really wasn't all that. It wasn't like a holy shit factor. Ethan Page, departed from AEW and went over to NXT. It wasn't a big deal. And, for Ethan Page to be honest with you, he wasn't relevant in pro wrestling since he was teaming up with Josh Alexander as a part of the North and TNA, to be honest with you. I mean, and that might be a hot take for a lot of fans out there or fans of Ethan Page. I'm just, I'm keeping it a stack with y'all, man. I just think with Ethan Page, there's really nothing that, really meets the eye as far as, oh my God, man, that's Ethan Page. He's a main event caliber talent. He's a great talent. I'm not saying he's not, but I would not put the company on the backs of Ethan Page. I just wouldn't. Trick Williams, obviously they made a great decision with Trick Williams getting the win and become the new NXT World Champion. He's got a lot of fans, man. He has a lot of momentum right now. Obviously, the fans are gravitated towards Trick Williams, and it was a right decision to have Trick Williams get the win in that matchup and become the new NXT World Champion. Where does this leave? Where does it leave Ethan Page? I have no idea. And I think that was one of the crucial parts about NXT was the fact that Ethan Page was their World Heavyweight Champion. I thought they could have done better things with it. We also saw an appearance last night, a little backstage banter, if you will, between Brian Pillman Jr. and CM Punk, former AEW talents, which I thought that was kind of ironic. But like I said, man, I'm not going to sit here and say that NXT show last night was complete shit. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But was it my cup of tea? No, it's not. I told you guys I wanted to do some kind of review for it, which that's the reason why I'm here today. But do I think I'm going to be covering NXT moving forward? I don't think so, man, to be honest with you. And I kind of said the same thing last time, but I kind of wanted to give it a chance. Everybody deserves a second chance, and I wanted to give it a second chance to kind of see what was going on with the show. And obviously, it was a lot of hype around the show, being that it was debuting on the CW network. It was live. CM Punk was a part of this show, so obviously there was it was a big deal. The Miz was also a part of the show as well. But I felt like it didn't match my expectations, and maybe I set the bar really high for those expectations, which is on me. But I just feel like it was, very, very underwhelming, to be honest with you, man. There really wasn't something where I was like, holy shit. Besides the Wentz and Lee match, there really wasn't that really caught my eye to be like, holy shit, NXT's back, this is a big deal, so on and so forth. And obviously, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and be stubborn and say, oh, well, it's one and done for NXT. No, obviously, it was their debut episode on the CW network, and we're going to see how things go playing out, for the fan base for NXT. For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of NXT anymore, man. And it's nothing against, the brand or anything else like that. But I will say this, too. As far as NXT, and this is, again, I'm going to go back to the Black and Gold brand. NXT was always that, developmental program for WWE, and it was always, and eventually they try to make it into a third brand. The problem I have with that is that if you're trying to make it a third brand now, there's really nothing really that different between Monday Night Raw and SmackDown and NXT. In the aspects of storytelling and just the quality of matches. There's not, I would say the main roster quality matches are a little bit better, but it's literally, I feel like it's the same show, man, to be honest with you. And there's really no hype around these takeovers anymore or these, special events for NXT. The hype's just not there. I think a lot of the fan base now for NXT is kind of on the same boat with me in the aspects that, we're still, thinking about the times that we had with NXT when Triple H was running it and it was a Black and Gold brand. You know what I mean? Like, those are fans that are diehard fans, and again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that you can look at multiple different companies, man, and the different transitions they've gone through. If you look at TNA, TNA at one time, they were firing all cylinders, man. They had an immense amount of talent, from Samoa Joe to AJ Styles to, Rhino to Christopher Daniels to, Robert Roode and James Storm, Beer Money. They had immense amount of talent. Sting, Sting had, revamped his career in TNA, and Sting with the TNA right after his tenure pretty much with WCW. So and TNA's had their very good times and very bad times, and there's those fans that have been there with TNA since day one. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm trying to say. It's the same thing with NXT. There's been fans that have been with NXT since day one, and I was with NXT. Maybe I wouldn't say with day one, but I was there during the Black and Gold brand and the takeovers of what they were in Mauro Ranallo, and maybe that was my own fault. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, too, it's unfair to compare and contrast, both brands right now, or both NXTs from what it is now to what it once was. But it's just, it's completely different, man. It's not something that I can see myself covering or giving reviews on a weekly basis. I just feel like I'm really not interested in it. Obviously Monday Night Raw is a different story. Friday Night SmackDown. Even AEW, and obviously AEW has a really, really big show coming up tonight, the 5-year anniversary show. The card looks absolutely stacked. I know Tony Khan's supposed to make a major announcement, probably pertaining to the TV deal with Warner Brothers Discovery, if I had to guess. So obviously Dynamite's going to have a big night tonight as well. But, like I said, man, I'm not going to sit here and say that NXT is complete shit, like I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to sit here and say that. I'm not going to be one of those guys where I'm like, you know what? Oh, yeah, NXT is awful. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's not my cup of tea. It's nothing against the talent or NXT as an entire brand. It's just not my cup of tea anymore, man. It's just not something that I'm really interested in anymore. You know what I mean? And I've always kind of been in the shadows with NXT and kind of, keeping an eye on it, see what's going on. But it's not something where it's like, man, I'm really intrigued on really what's going on here. And obviously NXT has got, a lot of people's attention when they were working with TNA and announced that they were going to work with Impact Wrestling. Got a lot of eyeballs on the product, and good for them. Absolutely. But it's just not the same, man. It really is not. Like I said, from the other companies, like when I mentioned Impact Wrestling and NXT and the Black and Gold brand, you can look at those transitions from each company, man, and there's people that have been there since day one. And sometimes those transitions work, and sometimes those transitions don't work. If you look at TNA, they went through a really, they started off with a really, really high. Obviously Jarrett was there, Sting, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels. They had really great talent, and then it kind of, took a different direction, and the company wasn't as best as it once was in the beginning. And then it kind of picked up momentum again with what's been going on here as of late. Obviously Scott D'Amore was there at one point, and he was doing great things with TNA when he was there, and his tenure when he was with TNA, and they've been firing all cylinders, man. They've had a lot of free agents that come over to TNA and put on a lot of great matches. I mean, you look at Dolph Ziggler. He's kind of revamped his career, if you will, being over in TNA. I think he's the current TNA World Heavyweight Champion, if I'm not mistaken. Mustafa Ali has wrestled for TNA. So, I mean, obviously it's panned out a little bit for some of those talents for TNA as well as TNA. You look at AEW, it's the same thing. A lot of, AEW in the beginning, they were firing all cylinders. And as the past couple of years, it's kind of been in a stalemate, man. It's not the same AEW that we all fell in love with when they announced AEW Dynamite and everything else, and they were full steam ahead. It's not, obviously things have changed. It's not the same as it once was. And you can look at Raw and SmackDown the same way. I mean, when Vince was taking over Raw and SmackDown was just, it was hard to watch, man. I don't know if you guys watch Raw and SmackDown, which I hope you guys do. When Vince was running the show there for Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, I mean, the shows were abysmal, man. They were awful. And then obviously we all found out what happened with Vince, and Vince left WWE, and Triple H took over with creative. And the shows have been firing on all cylinders, man. Like I told you guys before, it's really hard to say anything really, really negative about either Raw or SmackDown right now, because the way they have their builds up towards, even Bad Blood this weekend and everything else, and just the build up and the storylines and the matches, I mean, they've been great. I mean, I honestly can't complain. And that's not me saying, oh, I'm a pro WWE guy or pro AEW guy. I'm just being honest with y'all, man. There's really nothing I can really critique in a negative spotlight to put WWE in right now. I just can't. They're telling great stories. The build-up leading towards the PLEs have been fantastic here as of late. Obviously, Bad Blood's going to be a big, big-time show for them, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. But I'm not getting the same thing with NXT. I'm just not. I'm not getting the build. I'm not getting the storylines. It just, I don't know, man. It just doesn't really feel organic, to be honest with you. It really genuinely doesn't. And like I said, man, the best way I can describe NXT last night, just from my own perspective, is that it was really, really underwhelming. And I don't know why. I just felt like they should have come out with a bang on last night's debut episode, and I feel like we really did not get that. We damn sure did not get that match quality-wise. I mean, I think the only match that was really worth a damn was Lee versus Wentz, which was an absolute banger of a match. Every other match beside, Roxanne Perez and Julia, Trick Williams, and Ethan Page. I mean, we got an appearance from Bianca Belair and Jay Cargill, which, the fans popped for that. But other than that, man, there really wasn't, like, there was not really a moment there where I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. I didn't get that. Not with NXT. So like I said, man, I just wanted to do something kind of different for you guys. I kind of wanted to give you my mindset about NXT rather than just a full-on review of the show. And just give my mindset on it, man. Just give my opinion on the show and, and how I felt about the show, the good, the bad, and the ugly about the show, and my thoughts moving forward with NXT, and like I told you guys earlier, I just don't think it's going to be something that I'm going to continue to cover or do reviews on. I just don't. It's not my cup of tea, man. It really ain't. And that might be a hot take for some of you guys. And I do apologize, man. I just don't see. I'm not really interested in covering NXT, to be honest with you. I mean, honestly, from what I saw last night, it was almost, I think, a little bit better than what I've seen on NWA Power, to be honest with you. And that might be a very hot take for a lot of people, but it feels the same. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing really that's really catching my eye to be like, holy shit, NXT's back. It's just not. Obviously, cosmetically, yeah, it looks great. Obviously, the new belts look great, which is a big deal. Obviously, it's a big, thing for NXT to have, new championships, and they look great. Absolutely. And like I said, with the cosmetic stuff, they got, the logo with the new color background with the black and silver. They got the new intro, the new music for NXT, which, like I said earlier, man, in the beginning of the podcast today, the intro is fire. The song, the intro, the video, it was great. I thought it was awesome. And I definitely think it was something that, NXT really needed. But other than that, man, I mean, besides cosmetically with NXT last night, there really wasn't something that was a big change for me. That was, again, like a holy shit moment. It just really wasn't. I think the only holy shit moment I had was the matchup between Lee and Wentz. Other than that, there really wasn't anything that was really, again, really catching my eye, to be honest with you. So, like I said, man, I just wanted to give my opinion about the show, tell you guys how I felt about the show and what my plans were with NXT moving forward. And like I said, man, I just don't think me doing reviews on NXT is really going to be in the cards for me personally. I'm just not really 100% interested in it, and I feel like it'll be unfair to y'all and a disservice to you guys for me trying to give you guys a review on NXT when my heart's not in it. You know what I mean? And I can't do that to y'all. I can't do that to y'all. I can't do that to myself because I feel like I wouldn't be 100% honest with y'all. And every time I do these episodes, these podcasts, I am 100% honest with y'all and upfront with y'all. Every single time I upload, a podcast or a video to YouTube. And by the way, I know some of y'all have been watching these episodes on Spotify, which I do appreciate. I'm very grateful for that, so thank you very much. But go check out the YouTube channel, man. Go to YouTube, type in Stay Classic with Mr. Classic, man. Give it a like, subscribe, follow the channel, man. I'm always putting videos out there as well. The thumbnails look great, too, by the way. So it's not, something where it's like, what the hell is this? The thumbnails look great. And, the conversations I have on there about, pro wrestling, man, are fantastic, man. So if you guys follow me on Spotify or listen to me on Spotify or somehow came across my channel or my podcast on Spotify, hey, go over to YouTube, man. Check it out. Go over there, type in Stay Classic with Mr. Classic, follow, like, subscribe. It would mean the world to me and my family if you guys can go do that. And I want to kind of, keep this ball rolling, man, and see where this stuff goes as far as, Raw and SmackDown and AEW. And see where this goes, man, because, one of the biggest things I will tell y'all, man, as a fan, wrestling, everybody has their, their very high highs and their low lows in life. There's always that one thing that kind of keeps you grounded. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has their good days and their bad days, and everybody has gone through, stuff in their personal life, man. There's always been that one thing that you can go to and gravitate towards, man. It could be football, it can be basketball, it could be, UFC, it could be boxing, and I grew up, watching pro wrestling, and I grew up watching the UFC and pro boxing and football and everything else. And yeah, there's some friends of mine that are always, critical of my football choices and my favorite team and stuff like that. And, we always, make fun of each other all the time and have a good laugh about it. But what I'm saying to y'all is, man, for me, wrestling was something when I was growing up as a kid. It was one of those things that I can gravitate towards, no matter how life got chaotic or, how crazy things got. It was always that one thing that I can go towards and, kind of shut everything off around me and just enjoy myself and distance myself from the craziness, man, just because this world is crazy that we live in. So it was always something that I can gravitate towards and kind of just, shut the mind off for a minute and just actually enjoy the show. And like I told you, man, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, well, I do this for this or I do this for this. I do this podcast stuff for the passion I have for pro wrestling. And for me, just to give you all some personal, insight on my life, wrestling for me and my family has meant everything to me. And I know that might be something where it'd be like kind of cringy, but if I explain, maybe y'all will understand. My grandfather was a big fan of wrestling from way back in the day, man. And this is kind of how my fandom of wrestling kind of started when I was a kid. He was a big fan of pro wrestling. From watching Andre the Giant to watching, Haystacks Calhoun to Bruno Sammartino, and all those old school guys, man, that really paved the way for, pro wrestling. Pedro Morales, like I said, Bruno Sammartino, Lou Thez, those kind of guys, you know what I mean? Classy Freddie Blassie, Buddy Roberts, and he would always tell me these stories about these wrestlers, man, and I didn't really understand it then, but the way that he always described it to me as a kid was like, these were like superheroes, man. These were guys that you didn't you never seen personally, but you seen them on TV and they would wrestle and they told a hell of a story. The Fabulous Moolah, all these different wrestlers and all the stories behind it and what it meant to him. I didn't really understand it at that time, but as I got older and started really watching pro wrestling, man, it was really the moments. You know what I'm saying? It was one of those things, like I said, it just got you away from the real world for even 2 hours on a Monday night, for whether it's Monday Night Raw or WCW Nitro, you know what I mean? Or Thunder or SmackDown, you know what I mean? Like, it was an escape, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I try telling y'all, man, when I cover pro wrestling, it's because of the passion and the love that I have for this sport. And it is a sport. And it's a sport that's always going to be, it's always going to have its critics. It's always going to have its people that just undermine the business. And that's not my goal here, man. And the other thing, too, and I speaking of the old-time stuff, I really want to bring that back to the limelight, man. I feel like a lot of people just overlook what these men and women have done in the pro wrestling business, from guys like Bruno Sammartino. My grandpa was a big fan of Sammartino. And he would always hype him up all the time, man. We would talk about it all the time. We would be talking about football, wrestling, or fishing. That's what we would talk about all the time. And Bruno Sammartino was a big part of his life, and it was like, it was his hero. You know what I mean? Like, he thought this guy was, a legend even at that time when he was growing up watching pro wrestling. So, I mean, to me, hearing all the stories and hearing the stories about Andre and the matches that he's seen, because back in his time, there wasn't really WWE that much. It was, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And at that time when he was watching wrestling, it was, it was all over the country. It wasn't just WWE. You had the territories from, the Crockett's to, Florida Championship Wrestling to Mid-South Pro Wrestling to Stampede Wrestling up in Canada. And then you got the Pacific Northwest and stuff like that. So, like, the stories that he would tell me that, watching different matches and all these great wrestlers coming in from different territories and having the matches. NWA World Heavyweight Champion was a big deal. Harley Race was a big deal. And that's one of the things I've been trying to figure out with this since I've been doing this podcast stuff, is really trying to bring the old school back into the new school, man, and give these men and women that have, laid the foundation of pro wrestling, man, and give these men and women their flowers, man, and give them respects, because I feel like a lot of people don't do that. You have a lot of people doing this podcast stuff, which there's a lot of really good podcasters out there. Absolutely. But I feel like they don't really talk about the past, man. And a lot of people don't like to dwell on the past, myself included. But I feel like with just this genre and this sport, you have to look at the past to look at and appreciate the future and what we have now. Because if we didn't have the Sammartinos and the Lou Theszes and, the Wendy Richters and stuff like that, and all these managers from Captain Lou Albano to Classy Freddie Blassie, the Grand Wizard, if you will, or the Wizard, or whatever his name was. I think he managed like the Sheik or something like that. And all these managers, like, and Miss Elizabeth, you know what I mean, and how impactful she was for Randy. You know what I mean? She was almost a bigger star than Randy. You know what I mean? And that story was great. You know what I'm saying? Then you got the Mega Powers and how that all came together and how they had a falling out. Obviously one of the greatest managers of all time. Rest in peace to Bobby Heenan. Some of these people need to be showcased now and be appreciated, man. And these men and women and these managers and stuff like that getting their flowers and their just due for what they've done for the business. Obviously we have the WWE Hall of Fame, and I get that. But there's not a podcaster out there that is bringing the past into the spotlight now. And I think the biggest thing for me, like I mentioned to y'all, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think there's some truth behind that, man. I feel like you can't appreciate the future if you don't look at the past and see what the past got you to the future, whether that's in pro wrestling or whether that's in life. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not trying to preach to y'all, but it's just being honest with y'all, man, being upfront and being honest. And that's why y'all are here. And I appreciate y'all being here every single time, every single day. And I want to be one of those podcasters that brings the past into the future so we can all understand these people's vision and their dream, and then how their dream panned out to get what we have now with how big WWE is now and how big pro wrestling is now, and the stories, man. I mean, there's probably endless amount of matches, endless amount of stories that are not being showcased or even talked about for pro wrestling. When you look at world champions, a lot of people look at, oh man, Ric Flair, and Ric Flair is great, 16-time world heavyweight champion. But then you look at someone like Bruno Sammartino that held the belt for 6 or 7 years straight. There's never going to be someone else that's going to break Sammartino's record, ever. ever. And I feel like that's something that should be acknowledged and celebrated, you know what I mean? And you look at someone like Pedro Morales and how he came in and changed the game. Mil Mascaras, he came in the man of 1,000 masks, and, you know, he came in, you know, and fired on all cylinders, man. You know what I mean? People don't talk about these legends, you know? And I feel like someone like myself included should bring this to the limelight. Lou Thez and how great of a champion that he was. You know, Wendy Richter and how important WrestleMania one was, not only for pro wrestling, but for women's wrestling. I mean, if you look at WrestleMania 1, I mean, it was a cultural icon, a spectacle event. You know what I mean? You look at the match, I believe it was Wendy Richter versus Fabulous Moolah, if I'm not mistaken, where you had Captain Lou Albano involved, and then he had Cyndi Lauper involved. And it was a high-profile matchup for WrestleMania. You know what I mean? As well as, obviously, the WrestleMania 1's main event, which I believe was Hogan teaming up with Mr. T, taking on Bob Orton and Roddy Piper. Rest in peace to Piper. But again, man, I mean, a lot of people don't talk about these guys and these men and women that have paved the way for the superstars that we have now. The Soul Patrol, Tony Atlas and Soul Man Rocky Johnson. You know what I mean? Being the first ever African-American tag team to ever win, you know, the first ones to ever win a tag team championship. That's something to acknowledge, bro. That's something to celebrate. You know what I mean? And what those men meant to the business. You know what I'm saying? And that should be celebrated. Absolutely. And should be talked about and discussed. You know, and give these, you know, these men and women their flowers, man. Give them the respects that they deserve and paved the way for the talent that we have now. You know, obviously wrestling has changed a lot from what it once was to what it is now. You know, I couldn't imagine seeing someone like a Will Ospreay wrestling back in the 40s or 50s. I don't think it really would have worked. You know, or the Von Erichs, you know, and everybody knows about the Von Erich story. Everybody's seen the movie and how sad it was, man, seeing that the Von Erich family go through what they went through and seeing what Kevin went through and watching all, you know, what was going on with his brothers and, you know, with David and Kerry and Michael Von Erich and stuff like that. You know, there was a lot of craziness going on, man. And I'm not saying that should be celebrated. I'm not saying that at all. But it just goes to show you what that family has gone through being a part of professional wrestling. You know what I mean? That family legitimately thought they were cursed, you know? And to me, you know, as far as the Von Erichs, to me, my favorite Von Erich was Kerry. Kerry was severely underrated. I remember when he came into WWE, he was a Texas Tornado. You know, and at that time, he was wrestling pretty much with a peg leg. You know, he lost his leg in a motorcycle accident, and he was still wrestling on, you know, just pretty much one full leg. So obviously there was a lot of commitment there from the Von Erichs, and there was a lot of, you know, love they had for the business. Obviously the Sportatorium was a big, big deal, not only for the Von Erichs, but for professional wrestling. There was a lot of talent, endless talent, that would walk through the doors of the Sportatorium, and then we no longer have the Sportatorium. So even talking about the Sportatorium to the fans that don't understand what that meant for pro wrestling nowadays, you know, and bringing that into the spotlight, man, because like I said, it's, you know, you can't really understand and respect the future without understanding the past and how we got to this point. And I think for me personally, it's something that I've always been interested in as a pro wrestling fan. So like for people who are like, man, this guy knows this much about wrestling, or, you know, why does he cover pro wrestling? Well, this is the reason why I cover pro wrestling, because it means a lot to me. It means a lot to my family. It means a lot, you know, to me just growing up and becoming a man that I am in that, you know, that I'm now. And you know, my wife, you know, I love my wife to death, but, you know, she didn't really understand wrestling at the time. You know, she heard about Stone Cold and Hulk Hogan, but, you know, once I watched a couple, you know, NXT matches or showed her some classic matches, you know, we watch it now as a family. And I'm, for wrestling for that, I'm grateful for that. Absolutely. You know, I have a sister that has literally watched wrestling since she was a baby, you know, and she still watches wrestling till this day. And she always asks me questions about it. And she even goes to independent events now, you know what I mean? And she loves pro wrestling. And that's something that, you know, like I said, my family has. You know, I remember watching the Royal Rumble with my mom one time, and she was, you know, yelling like it was a damn Super Bowl, or yelling like she's playing bingo somewhere at some bingo hall. You know, it was just, for my family, wrestling means a lot, because every time there would be a special event or a pro wrestling event, my family would come together. And it means the world to me. Family is one of the most important things in life that you can have, whether it's good or bad. It's always important. You know what I mean? And I feel like for me, there's always that one thing that brings families together. And for me, it was pro wrestling, you know, and then football, obviously, you know. Big fan of Thanksgiving, by the way. But, yeah, man, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I apologize for going on a huge tangent about this, but I wanted to give you guys an insight about me, who Mr. Classic really is. Why is Mr. Classic doing this? Why, what is the purpose of the podcast, man? Where are you trying to go with this? Or, what's your plans with this? And how do you personally feel about pro wrestling, and what has pro wrestling done for you, as a person, as an individual? You know what I mean? And that's why I wanted to tell you guys how much it means to me and my family, and that it's just bigger than pro wrestling for me. You know what I mean? This is something that my family comes together on, and we've always been fans of pro wrestling. And, like I said earlier, me and my wife watch wrestling every single week, and it's one of the things that my wife genuinely enjoys. And it makes me, if my wife's happy, man, I'm thrilled. And I know a lot of people say, well, happy wife, happy life. I get it. Ha, ha, ha. But, no, man, it's something that I enjoy with my family. And, my vision with this podcast and what I would like to do is, like I told you guys, man, is bring some of the past into the future and really have people understand, if they don't know or want to know, understand and hear the stories, man, from what the past was. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm, a historian of pro wrestling. I'm not. Obviously, I got to do my homework. But to bring that to y'all and to understand my passion for this and to understand how much knowledge that I do have for this, because some people come into something and have no kind of knowledge of what they're doing. They're just pretty much winging it. I have a lot of knowledge. I'm not saying I have all the knowledge, but I have studied this sport, man. Just like any other sport that I get into, whether it's pro football or whether it's MMA. You know what I mean? I watched MMA for a very, very long time. I'm saying way before the Chuck Liddell days. And I know there's some, Chuck Liddell Iceman fans out there as well as Tito Ortiz fans. My family kind of had that same deal too, because half my family loved Tito Ortiz and half my family loved Chuck Liddell. So, and by the way, I was a Liddell fan, just so y'all know that. But yeah, man, that's what it means to me. It's more than just covering pro wrestling. This is, I'm passionate about pro wrestling. I'm passionate about this sport, and I'm passionate about letting people understand, pro wrestling. And that's why I'm here. You know what I mean? It's not something where I'm going to sit here and say, oh, well, the hell with it. I'm here just to bullshit everybody. No, I'm not here to bullshit anybody. Because at the end of the day, you can bullshit anybody, but when you meet that person face to face, they're going to talk to you and ask you about, hey, you remember this? You remember that? What's your rebuttal going to be, man? Oh, I didn't say that. I don't remember that. That's a bunch of bullshit. No, it's not why I'm here, man. I want to be upfront and honest with you from here, like from the very beginning. If y'all been here from the beginning all the way to the end of this, man, we're going to ride this out till the wheels fall off. And I appreciate you guys being here. The ones that do listen to this podcast, I am very grateful. My family is grateful. We appreciate y'all, man. And like I said earlier, man, if you guys do have YouTube, which most of y'all do, I would be extremely grateful if you guys can go over to YouTube, type in Stay Classic with Mr. Classic. Give it a subscribe, man. Give it a like. Give it a follow. It would mean the world to me. Give it a thumbs up so we can keep this thing rolling with these podcasts, man. And like I said, give you guys the news and rumors for pro wrestling, give you these reviews of Raw and SmackDown as well as AEW. And speaking of AEW, real quick, before I get the hell up out of here, there will be a review tomorrow, like I usually do on Thursdays, for AEW Dynamite tonight. Hopefully you guys tune in to Dynamite, because I think Dynamite's going to be very interesting tonight. I think Tony Khan's supposed to make a special announcement, like I told y'all earlier, pertaining to possibly the deal that AEW has got with Warner Brothers Discovery. Hopefully there's some kind of, talks about HBO Max, because I'm not a big fan of them dropping BR Live. No offense. So hopefully they'll, fix that. And it should be a really good night for AEW tonight. It is their 5th year anniversary, celebrating 5 years of existence for AEW. There's a lot of high-profile matches tonight. They've got Will Ospreay versus Ricochet, which is going to be an absolute banger. You also have Britt Baker making her return since All In. She has a matchup in her hometown. Dynamite will be live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania tonight, Britt Baker's hometown. Got Bryan Danielson versus Okada, which again is going to be a very interesting matchup, very good matchup. So for what it's worth, man, on paper, it looks like this Dynamite show, this 5-year anniversary Dynamite show is pretty much almost booked better than the Dynamite Grand Slam that we recently got about a week ago. So I'm definitely going to be interested in seeing what goes on tonight. Seeing if we hear anything from MVP, or seeing if we see a new arrival, possibly a Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin. So again, man, there's going to be a lot of questions going into tonight's Dynamite. But like I said, man, with that being said, I want to get the hell out of here. I hope you guys are out here staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.